Okay, so it's a 12, so we'll get started. So thanks for joining us today. This is a Korean Studies Colloquium organized by the Kim Program in Korean Studies at the University of Pennsylvania. I'm Hyunjun Park, Director of the Kim Program. On behalf of the Kim Program, I welcome you all to our bi-weekly Korean Studies Colloquium, which is a venue to learn diverse research on Korea and Koreans in both humanities and social sciences. Before introducing today's speaker, let me remind you that you can write your name to the chatting rooms if you have questions during the presentations. You don't need to write the question in detail, but only your full name, because we'll call your name in the order of the question asked after our speaker finishes her presentations. When your name is called, please unmute yourself and ask the question directly to the speaker. During the presentation, you can unmute yourself, but during the Q&A sessions, you can unmute yourself and you can ask the question directly to our speaker. Today, we changed a little bit of the format, so instead of me introducing our speakers, today I'd like to introduce Dr. Dahae Kim, who is currently the Moon Family Postdoc Fellow in our Kim program. Dr. Kim will introduce today's speaker. Dr. Kim, please.
Thank you, Hyunjun. Yes. So it is a great pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Professor Michelle Cho. Michelle Cho is an assistant professor of East Asian popular cultures and affiliated faculty in cinema studies at the University of Toronto. Her research and teaching focus on questions of collectivity and popular aesthetics in Korean film, media, and popular culture. She has published on Korean cinema, television, video, and pop music in numerous journals and edited volumes. And her first book, Genre World, Global Forms and Millennial South Korean Cinema, is forthcoming and theorizes South Korean cinema's transnational dimensions through the concept of genre transference. Her current project, Precarious Media, Serial Affect in K-pop fandoms, examines the convergence of platforms, affect, and fantasies of globalization in K-pop performance and fan cultures. So let me hand our virtual floor to Professor Cho. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Dahae, for that introduction. Yes. And I'm really glad to be here. I'm really excited to be able to share this work in this venue. One of the strange sort of silver linings, although maybe that's not exactly the right way to put it, about the current conditions is that, you know, a lot of the time we're giving these talks on Zoom so people can tune in who aren't able to be present physically, and that has been really a gift, I think, so that you can kind of participate in events in this mediated way. So I want to just kind of let you know before I begin that this is definitely work in progress. It's part of this project that I'm working on, and it's an attempt to process what has been going on in the fandom, in K-pop fandoms, especially in North America, but also you know, elsewhere since this summer, and to kind of think about what the kind of problems and potentials are of this newly emergent political identity that K-pop fans seem to have acquired. I have a tendency to like ramble, so I'm actually going to read my presentation, although I'll kind of stop and explain the PowerPoint images that I've prepared along the way. I apologize for that because I know that it can be sometimes difficult to understand what people are saying when they're just reading something, but I hope you'll kind of bear with me and forgive me for that. So I'm going to share my screen with you so that you can see the PowerPoint presentation that I've prepared, and then we will begin. Okay, so here we are. So the title of my presentation today is RM for President, K-pop Protests, Repertoires, and Populist Soft Powers, Populist Soft Power. So I have kind of this jumble of words and phrases put together, and in some way that reflects the fact that I am trying to think about pretty disparate things together. And so I'm hoping that this will make sense, given that I am juxtaposing things and moving kind of quickly between topics, just because this is also kind of a condensation of a longer piece of writing that I've been working on. So I'm going to start off with just kind of a brief description of the meme. And I have actually a lot of screenshots of really amusing tweets that I hope you will pay attention to and get as much enjoyment from as I do. But okay, so the meme. On September 24th, 2018, Kim Namjoon, aka RM, the leader and spokesperson for the K-pop idol group BTS, became the first K-pop celebrity to deliver a speech in front of the United Nations General Assembly. The group began working with UNICEF, the United Nations Children's Fund, in 2017 to support its #EndViolence campaign, which aimed to address corporal punishment and peer violence, especially in the form of bullying, both in schools and online. RM's speech kicked off another UN program, Generation Unlimited, an education and work support program for youth. His debut as UN Goodwill Ambassador and spokesperson for Generation Unlimited thrilled BTS fans across the globe, giving rise to the meme, RM for President. While this meme was somewhat facetious, what BTS fans seemed to suggest in their advocacy of RM as a quasi-political leader was the failure of existing leadership or the political processes of their respective societies to respond to the concerns and crises of their generation. RM's foray into the sphere of geopolitical discourse raises a number of questions about the politics of pop culture consumption and fandom, global community and coalition building, and the promises and limitations of existing political systems. As a group, BTS fans, also known as ARMY, many of whom are here, are perhaps the embodiment of what scholars and theorists of populism have lamented is missing in the contemporary political landscape, that is, centrist populists, who gather around the media celebrity of BTS. This focus on personality or charismatic leadership is one of the core features of populist movements in attempts to define populism in political science and social theory literatures. Another is a perceived antagonism between elites and the people. And a third core tenet is the centrality of identity-based affiliation or identity politics. These features seem to mold quite convincingly onto media fandoms like the ARMY. Many critiques of populism, however, locate its danger in its status as a political style or empty form. It can thus accommodate any content from far-right xenophobic populisms of Trumpism and neo-Nazism to the left populism of the South Korean pro-democracy movement and its more recent candlelight protests, or Latin American anti-authoritarian populism such as the current constitutional referendum in Chile. As a group, the longstanding values of the BTS ARMY have often centered on liberal gestures of charity and community service, as shown in the sorts of activities BTS fans perform as tributes to the group. I'm going to go through some of these slides, which I have not since I've been reading. So this is just a kind of image of the Washington Post coverage of Kim Namjoon's speech in 2018. So it did make headlines around the world and was definitely featured in North American mainstream media. These are some tweets that I grabbed that I think kind of give you a sense of the humorous nature of this meme, but also that there's something else kind of embedded there, which is this kind of desire for a utopian collectivity, a nation of ARMY or a BTS nation. So in the tweet on the left, I think it's kind of interesting that this person seems to be voicing a specific criticism of their national government. Paraguay needs you. On the right, however, RM is featured in an edit that places him very much in an American presidential position. So all of those identifying objects in that image are very, very, very American. I mean, they're emblems of the American state, right? Okay, here you see on the left a kind of funny edit that ARMY have made to appropriate the Uncle Sam image and to reuse it for BTS ARMY. And on the right, there's an image of a screenshot of a television broadcast when BTS was on Good Morning America, and somebody had made a sign, Namjoon for president, and it was shown on TV. This, I think, is a really funny tweet, and it includes some very clever edits. An edit is just a term that's used to describe when a fan kind of takes an image of an idol and modifies it. And so this also got quite a bit of engagement on Twitter, over 13,000 likes. But I just blew up the images that are included in this tweet because I think they're quite interesting. And again, they really focus, except for the last one, on the US context. So here you have RM kind of edited in to be shaking Obama's hand. And there is some similarity, I think, between the kind of leadership that these two men represent. There's a sort of Obama nostalgia, I think, in some of these calls for RM for president. This is, RM and the rest of the BTS members in the Oval Office. Again, this is the same image, actually, of RM at the podium at the White House. And then this is RM kind of flying the flag of this BTS Army Nation. So now I have some kind of examples of Army advocacy, or the kind of collective organizing that Army, that characterizes the sort of projects that Army take on, especially to celebrate group members' birthdays. And this is a sort of thing also that other K-pop fandoms also do when they are organizing activities that are supposed to reflect positively on their group, their favorite groups. They're doing things that are kind of public service sort of projects. So yeah, what I think is quite interesting is in this series of tweets, you have Army from various parts of the globe organizing environmental cleanups or environmental projects, again, in the name of Army and in the name of BTS. Okay, so yeah, so these are the sorts of activities that BTS fans perform as tribute to the group on birthday celebrations and other key dates. And this is also in addition to the collectivism inherent in fan communities as such, which rely on voluntary fan labor and the circulation of its products in a complex gift economy. BTS's strategic partnership with UNICEF and the fan response RM for President point to a broad acceptance of generationally defined identities and political claims. So yeah, the fact that UNICEF kind of titled this project Generation Unlimited, it sort of suggests the specificity of a youth generation, but also kind of going beyond it. And so my point here is not to say that K-pop fans are all of a certain generation, but rather to say that, there is this kind of sensibility that comes with a youth-oriented kind of drive to change society or critique it in some way that you can sympathize with, even if you are no longer youth like myself, but you are kind of sympathetic to those values. Okay, so RM for President echoes this generational divide with a call for a leader befitting a youth collective rather than one defined by ethnicity or nationality. The resonance of this message of youth empowerment also captures the intensifying generational conflicts embedded in memes like "Okay Boomer" and in the polarized reception of figures like climate activist Greta Thunberg or Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. The discourse of generational antagonism and youth crisis also resounds outside of North America, as we've seen in Hong Kong's protest movements. What I want to talk about today is how we might contextualize the emergent politicization of K-pop fandom within a broader populist turn. I consider fandom a contemporary form of populism in two somewhat opposed senses. First, in fandom's assertions of a visual and affective commons and its gift economy, and on the other hand, in the resemblance between the affective excesses of fandom and those of the mass or the crowd. If contemporary geopolitics are defined by the rise of various populisms, as many political theorists have argued, I propose that K-pop fandom can be understood as part of this zeitgeist. Just as populist movements are often harnessed by state power, so too is K-pop's visible global fandom given a central role in affirming Korean culture industry's strengths as soft power assets. However, K-pop's fan cultures also point to widespread conditions of alienation, especially for a young generation facing a lifetime of precarious environmental and labor conditions. So in what follows, I want to compare K-pop's soft power populism with its emergent politicization in relation to anti-racist and police abolition movements in North America to argue that the latter offers an alternative model of channeling the potential for technology-based coordination to augment on-the-ground activism. Okay, so I'm moving on to this next section on K-pop protest repertoires. 2020 began with a bang for the Korean pop group BTS. Following weeks of anticipation and record-breaking pre-sales, their album Map of the Soul 7 was released to great fanfare in February 2020, becoming the biggest selling album of all time in South Korea and topping pop music charts in over 20 countries, including Billboard's illustrious albums chart in the US. Despite the alarming spread of a South Korean cluster of COVID-19 cases and the government's large-scale containment efforts there, the group released multiple music videos for the album's 2 lead tracks and promoted the album and forthcoming world tour on several American television shows and media outlets during February and early March. But as the pandemic spread through North America, mainly via Europe rather than East Asia, BTS and its powerful army had to shelve their plans to gather on the group's tour, foregoing the excitement of the mass spectacles that have become a feature of live K-pop performance. Instead, the group's international fandom were left to cling to the digital intimacies that the group has fostered with fans through a steady and robust stream of social media content on Twitter, VLive, and the proprietary fandom platform Weverse. The period of pandemic self-isolation not only heightened digital connections between fans and their favorite groups, but also brought new fans into the fold. One might argue that pandemic conditions have increased the power of media companies, whether broadcast or digital, since captive audiences under lockdown have grown increasingly dependent on forms of mediated connection. The prolonged period of homebound isolation seems also to have channeled vital energies of protest, especially among those who've been forced to suspend their lives in the face of a bleak economic forecast and public health crisis. This growing critical consciousness erupted in the uprisings that followed the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, Minnesota on May 25, 2020. As protesters surged into the streets to express their grief and rage at the injustice of Floyd's death, many fans around the globe contributed their efforts through the conversion of fan activities into a repertoire of anti-racist protest, hashtag activism, culture jamming, and online fundraising and organizing, many in the name of K-pop fandom and the BTS army. Thus, K-pop fans, a loose coalition of individuals who are identified by their subcultural consumption of South Korean idol pop, found their collective identity shifting from one of an often denigrated and dismissed pop culture fandom into an activist bloc, best equipped to respond to the intertwined conditions of police violence and the COVID-19 pandemic's intensification of existing social inequalities. While the pandemic had kneecapped most brick and mortar businesses, it seemed to have invigorated digital teleconferencing, streaming, and content sharing platforms. Indeed, big tech has seen its profits grow handsomely from the shift of work and leisure alike to online platforms, and K-pop entertainment industries, which already cultivate multi-sided mediated intimacies through technological means, have emerged as leaders of remote live stream pop concerts that will likely transform the business of pop performance. Media has had to stand in for a public sphere, which has resulted in both increased engagement and isolation. According to Sarah Jackson, Moya Bailey, and Brooke Foucault-Wells, the co-editors of the recent volume, Hashtag Activism, Networks of Race and Gender Justice, on Twitter, ordinary people can engage in public speech and actions without mediation by the mainstream media or other traditional sources of power. Moreover, the use of hashtags and other conversational conventions enables an emergent organization whereby individual tweets coalesce into a larger collective storytelling. Citing internet sociologist and the author of Twitter and Tear Gas, Zeynep Tufekci, Jackson, Bailey, and Wells assert that hashtags facilitate something that looks very different from traditional institutional-based politics, a kind of democratic participation that's inclined toward a horizontal identity-based politics, identity-based movement building that arises out of grievances and claims. Twitter itself, then, is proposed here as a populist platform. The caveat, of course, is that Twitter is also privately owned and a for-profit entity. It's not a neutral host of American demagoguery, in other words, because hosting Trump's Twitter account serves the company's interests. Its algorithmic design amplifies particular nodes of connection for the sake of its own advertising revenue and data collection. However, the platform also allows the formation of counterpublics through the mutual recognition of voices from the margins into collectives that network on the site. In the case of K-pop fandom on Twitter, we see the transformation of media fandom into a mediatized public sphere created by the platform's global extension and reorganization of subjects into interest-based identities. Just as fandom offers an identity that exceeds externally imposed normative categories, such as nationality, ethnicity, age, race, or gender, Twitter and other social media platforms offer unprecedented forms of self-authorship through voluntary affiliation. Given then that populism as a form of political discourse is always prone to inclusion and exclusion, expansion and closure, and if social media platforms can be understood as a mechanism of populist organization, it's fitting that K-pop fandom in its mediated form displays both tendencies. I want to just kind of give a brief footnote here to say that there's a longer history of K-pop fan activity and fandom conventions that don't conform to this current understanding, which I think a lot of fans have, who only have ever experienced K-pop fandom as a Twitter, YouTube, VLive mediated phenomenon. This is a different discussion. There are really wonderful scholars who go kind of further into the longer history of K-pop and its fandoms. So I don't think I can cover it here, but I would be happy to talk about it in the Q&A if it's of interest to people. Okay. So in the last decade, the rising transnational popularity of K-pop has been correlated to the growth of digital distribution and consumption. Over and above its status as a genre of music, K-pop is a media phenomenon that pairs transmedia delivery with the cultivation of visible fan communities whose engagement can be registered on globally popular media platforms, especially social networking and video sharing sites. In the realm of live fandom assemblies, performance studies scholar Soo-Kyung Kim highlights the complementary forms of digital and embodied presence in K-pop performance cultures. And a key example of this dynamic, which here applies to pre-pandemic conditions, of course, can be found at fan conventions, especially KCON, a Korean wave convention operated by the powerful media conglomerate CJ Entertainment and Media, CJ E&M. So this is just an image here of KCON Paris as like an illustration of what I'm discussing here. KCON began as a vehicle for fostering American consumption of Korean wave contents, but rapidly expanded from a single-day event in Southern California in 2012 to 2018's 8-city edition with gatherings in Paris, Abu Dhabi, Mexico City, Sydney, Saitama, and Chiba, Japan, in addition to New York and Los Angeles. What multi-sided events like KCON suggest is that K-pop idol celebrity and cultural contents have broad global appeal. Another example of K-pop's global reach is SM Entertainment's successful inroads into Latin pop music markets. In 2019, SM held a concert at the 50,000-seat Estadio Nacional in Santiago, Chile, and since at least 2013, K-pop artists have pursued collaborations with Latin pop artists, songwriters, and producers. So as K-pop pivots towards these new regional markets, fans and observers may applaud a perceived opening to a broader world than merely that of US pop cultural hegemony. Moreover, in pursuit of new markets and audiences, K-pop's pivot to Central and South America, South Asia, and Africa through regional pop music elements constitutes K-pop's own anti-elitist cosmopolitanism. From Bhangra to South African house beats to the Latin rhythms that have found chart-topping dominance across the Americas, to the pop melodies sourced from Swedish hit-making songwriters and producers. This musical syncretism aims to encompass the world through populist tastes as expressed through a version of the world indexed by digital platforms. This version of the world produced by K-pop's mashup of global popular aesthetics remains enthralled by measures of global influence determined by national branding and soft power influence, which I'll get into in a bit. However, I also want to highlight the sociality of K-pop's global fandom, especially the embrace of fan affect as both an embodied, often irrational sensibility of excess and a sphere of pedagogy, knowledge sharing, and collective self-organization. So to illustrate, to say a little bit maybe more about what I mean about the kind of dual dimension of K-pop as a K-pop fandom in its social media conditions as a populist form, I want to briefly here give some air to the fact that what we've seen in the kind of protest repertoires that I was describing that K-pop fans have undertaken in the summer of culture jamming, taking over white supremacist hashtags and organizing on behalf of Black Lives Matter and also supporting other kind of activist organizations, you've also seen with the increased visibility of K-pop fans, more antagonism, I would say, within the fandoms. And that includes like gatekeeping gestures, trying to kind of dictate who should be included and then kicking out those who are deemed not part of the fandom or properly part of the fandom. There are, ongoing fan wars. There have been some pretty troubling instances of doxing or threats to dox fans, which means, kind of putting individuals' personal information online and sending people after them. That there's a kind of chronic issue of Black fans often feeling targeted because they are calling out anti-Blackness within the fandoms or trying to hold the companies a bit more responsible to support these causes that are so important to large numbers of their fans. And there's also a kind of tone of US exceptionalism at times when fans who are American are sort of, I guess, expecting the US national context to be very transparent and legible to people all around the world, even if they are not in America or don't have that kind of as their frame of reference. And I think that what I'm trying to get at here is that, because K-pop fandom is part of this larger world that we live in, which is also characterized by increased polarization in public discourse, it's going to exhibit some of the same tendencies. And that's something that we should consider carefully, but that doesn't mean that that requires us to then say, oh, K-pop fandom is bad, or try to defend it as pure, as some sort of pure space. But again, I think using the analogy with kind of political populist movements really helps us to, again, understand the potentials and also the pitfalls of what's going on here. Okay, so I also wanted to mention that there is some kind of concern that this phrase, TikTok teens and K-pop stans, kind of started to be used by mainstream media as a sort of shorthand for, I think, youth activism. And so then there would be like a predictable backlash by people who were outside of the fandom who are condemning it as some sort of instigator of conflict without really understanding what it is. And I wanted to mention that, this happens in the US where, a bunch of conservatives start to kind of target K-pop fans as somehow some very subversive, dark internet group. But there's also a precedent for this in the way that K-pop fans were scapegoated by the Chilean government for also being instigators in the kind of uprisings that happened in Chile in 2019. And that was also a kind of youth initiated movement that then gathered more support from the population at large. Okay, so I'm going to kind of switch gears and talk a little bit about, to illustrate, I think, what I was just talking about, this idea of pop culture syncretism as another form of populist aesthetics. I'm going to talk through a brief analysis of a specific track from BTS. There are lots that I could have chosen, but this is one that I was just thinking about because the group actually performed this track on American television this past week, but it is not from the most recent album release. So, okay, so to give an example, again, of the popular syncretism I've just been describing, I want to talk about the BTS single Idol. Idol is a club track that uses a South African house beat to weave the sounds, icons, and rituals of communal festivity from across Afro-Caribbean carnival cultures, Korean folk music and dance, often performed during harvest and New Year's festivals, and Bollywood cinema's large-scale musical numbers. With this collage technique, the video links group celebration to the forms of togetherness found in digital cultures, including multiplayer gaming, internet memes, and viral video. Upon release of a teaser for the music video, 2 days before the full single and album dropped, Korean netizens coined a new genre label, Chosun EDM, to describe what they heard. So I'm going to play this teaser for you quickly so you can see what I mean. I'm so fun wherever I go. It's okay. It's great. So maybe you can see why that teaser kind of gave people, especially in Korea, the impression that this would be a kind of kugak and electronica fusion, because that is what you get in this version of the song. Kugak here refers to Korean traditional instrumentation. But what happens, what came with the full-length version of the music video defied all expectations of traditional Korean pageantry being the focus of this video. I'm going to kind of trust that enough people have seen the video because I don't think I have time to show it. But this is just an opening frame from the Idol music video that clearly places the group in a very, very different setting. So, so the opening seconds of the full-length version presents the group members decked out in suits cut from Ankara prints set against a CG tableau from what kind of looks like The Lion King on acid. The video, though, proceeds through fast-paced dance and scenery changes, incorporating the viral choreography for the South African Gwara Gwara dance that also appeared in American rapper Childish Gambino's This Is America, which was another viral video phenomenon from 2018. In alternating feature segments for individual group members, rapid-fire match and jump cuts pair with neon colors through a series of CG backdrops. At about the halfway mark, the music video fulfills the promise of the teaser video, placing the group in an electric yellow Korean pavilion in modified Korean traditional dress, taking folk dance steps to whistles and electronic beats. Each of these swiftly woven segments across rap verse, anthemic chorus, and vocal bridge Reference is the BTS multiverse, with the group restaging choreography from no less than 12 earlier singles. The group invited American rapper Nicki Minaj to contribute a verse to a remix version of Idol and released a comparably re-edited video that places her in a pop orientalist setting. So I'm going to skip ahead to that. So this is Nicki Minaj in that remix video version. She's clearly not in the same space as BTS, so they are communicating through digital platforms. And so, okay, this is what I wanted to find. So what I find especially delightful about the video is the way that Hango script, in a similar shade of electric yellow as the pavilion and Minaj's wig, scrolls across the screen behind her, transliterating her rap for Korean audiences. So while parodying the use of Asian lettering as Orientalist decoration, the scrolling subtitles also foreground translation and the multiple worlds of meaning that overlay in the video image. Idol connects world music and internet culture with the kinds of collectivity associated with communal ritual, and thus constitutes a version of the popular that marries folk culture with commercialized cultural production and social media reflexivity. Arguably, the music video presents pure spectacle, yet it also enacts a form of transcultural communion based on the lateral connectivity of digital networks and globalized youth culture. So to go back to some of the images that I had skipped over initially, I wanted to kind of suggest that this video puts together all of these references to familiar digital experiences. So there's a shark image that's presented in the video, which conjures up kind of both Baby Shark and this art piece, famous kind of contemporary art piece. And so you have this kind of convergence of high and low and a combining of various experiences into something that can be accessible in different ways to different people. This is just a series of images that shows the direct citation of also pop culture from other regions. So this is a screenshot of a musical number from a Bollywood film from 2018, which was very, very successful. And you can see these are two shots from that film. And there's a kind of borrowing of that aesthetic for the group dance scene in the Idol music video. So in a way, this kind of drawing on popular culture and sensibility from across different places is a sign that the group kind of intends this whole aesthetic to be a celebration of communal experience. And so in a way, it's kind of the mashup of references is intended here to be as inclusive as possible. Okay, so while it's inclusivity is very apparent, what also I think I'm trying to point out here, though, is that the video is really also focused on these like mediated experiences, and so that's something that sort of delimits the kind of expansiveness that we can attribute here to the group, because it really is a world that is imagined through the mediating influence of kind of media platforms and kind of pop culture texts. Okay, so I'm almost done, and you may think like, okay, so wow, how does this all add up? I'm going to ask you all that question, actually. So I'm hoping that this spurs some thoughts for you. Oh, I did have a couple of slides, actually, or just one more slide that I wanted to reference relating to Idol, which is that, of course, this is a shot from the set where the group filmed the performance that then aired on Jimmy Fallon, the television show. You can see that it was then featured by Korean News, and they did shoot this video or this performance on site at the Gyeongbok Palace in Seoul. So it's going back to the teaser promise of really highlighting Korean culture and a sense of culture as a collective property of the people. And so I also wanted to note, though, that of course the Seoul city also tweeted out the identifying characteristics of the BTS performance, so that everyone would know how next time when, you know, we're all able to be tourists again, we can go visit that site, and hopefully it will bring lots of visitors to flock there. Okay, so I'd like to begin this closing section with a brief review of the term soft power. So I know that I included it in this presentation title, and it is something that I think about all the time, but I am a little bit unsure, a little bit skeptical of how to make sense of what soft power is and how it's working when we're talking about cultural texts that are this multi-layered and polyvocal. So I'll explain what I mean in a second. Okay, so while Joseph Nye's framework, he's the political scientist who came up with this term, is notoriously US-centered, I found in my research that the concept also frequently animates the technocratic approach to globalization that's characterized the Korean state since the early 1990s, and thus has deeply permeated both popular and bureaucratic understandings of the public dimensions of commercial cultural industries, especially in a context in which the perceived intersection of diplomatic and commercial exchanges is given such close attention. The rhetoric of soft power is so prevalent that it's even entered into cultural producers' own marketing strategies. So everybody kind of uses the term soft power, and it's a really ubiquitous phrase and concept. But again, I want to kind of like push a little bit and see if we maybe can specify it further, or if we are talking about the same thing when we're talking about soft power. In my involvement in the academic communities that have produced scholarship on the Korean wave, I've also found many soft power proponents, perhaps because cultural policy is so invested, South Korean cultural policy is also invested in the academy as a site where soft power can and should be cultivated. Yet what the concept of soft power can't account for is the ebb and flow of national consciousness at the level of cultural consumption. In some ways, the outcomes of soft power ascendancy are clear. Since adopting an aggressive policy framework to support creative industries as a privileged economic sector, South Korea has experienced a steady rise in tourism and cultural export revenues. However, the extent to which this increase in consumption of Korean cultural commodities translates into state power is rather unclear, and was perhaps tested by the deflating outcomes of the US-North Korea summit last year in Hanoi. We should question the ways that the connection between culture industries and soft power, especially when quantified as YouTube view counts, Twitter metrics, or revenue statistics, assumes that these texts are straightforwardly legible to their audiences as well as fixed in meaning. Media critics like Jody Dean argue that the media-dependent representation of soft power is actually an empty signifier of the capture of value in the circulation and recirculation of mere acts of meaningless communication, a system that Dean calls communicative capitalism. Further, Peter Seeger refers to this condition as, quote, collective speculation in mediatized populist democracy, where the people have increasingly been redefined as sovereign consumers and citizens whose affinities with popular media, culture, and commodities are prime capitalizable assets for industrial and political actors. I would agree that the claim embedded in theories of soft power that media consumption has explanatory force in the sphere of geopolitics doesn't quite hold. However, this assumption is also a common self-reflexive condition for fans embedded in digital communities of K-pop consumption. The threat presented by crazed netizenry or the digital version of the madness of the crowd is being converted into a form of soft power in the era of the expansion of fandom as a form of cultural citizenship. In K-pop's MO, fandom cultivates soft power against the assumption that soft power is exercised by the state. So what does it mean that in the social media fueled globalization of the K-pop market, the South Korean state relies on a kind of populist discourse that can only be produced by individual international fans? So I want to end here by kind of suggesting that as opposed to thinking about, the impact of fan activism or fan amplification of K-pop on platforms like Twitter in terms of populist soft power, kind of like bringing attention to the greatness of a group in order to, in a way that can quickly be kind of co-opted by either the state or by the K-pop industry. I would, I kind of want to suggest, and this is something that, you know, I also welcome questions and pushback on, that we think about how to use the capacities that social media provides for creating networks of affiliation organization more in the vein of a kind of activist networking. So I have noticed that there's a kind of coincidence in the timeline of K-pop fandom's expansion on Twitter and that of the establishment of anti-racist protest networks. So they're really kind of from around the same period of time. And I think that what that led to is a kind of overlapping, obviously, in the membership of fan and activist networks. You know, these are both groups of people that are considered to be very online. And so that may have brought this kind of convergence that was perhaps unexpected, but ended up being quite effective in bringing K-pop fandom into participation in these kind of networks. And so I wonder if that kind of populism is maybe an alternative to the way that soft power populism is operating. So those are my thoughts. I'm going to close here. I have no idea what time it is, so I'm going to come back to you. And thank you so much for your attention and for taking time. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. So it's perfect. It's 12:46. So yeah, it's within exactly the time. So we have several questions. I will try to, you know, have as many questions, but please be mindful because we have to wrap up by 1:30. So let's see how far we can go. And I see that lots of exchange among some of the audience, which I don't see as them as a necessary question, but if I miss something, just please write your name, so that I will actually, you know, more than happy to accommodate you, actually, your question. So we'll start with the first question, which is from Matthew Berbiguer. I'm sorry for my probably pronunciation. So Matthew, please.
No problem. Hello, Professor Cho. I'm glad to see you.
Hi.
I really enjoyed your presentation. It was very nice. It was a very refreshing topic. I really enjoyed it. I had a little question because when I saw how you introduced RM speech at the beginning, that made me think of the Army Independence Day. I don't know if you heard of that.
Mm-hmm.
And like the whole everything that was, you know, involved around, and especially how it was kind of a day where armies kind of took their independence from the K-pop fandom and said that BTS wasn't K-pop, it wasn't this kind of thing. So I was just wondering and curious to see how would you incorporate that in this, in your research, or what you thought about it. So yes, that's it.
Yeah, thank you for that question. You know, I haven't thought about it too much because I think within this project, I'm kind of, I'm sort of bracketing the idea or kind of setting